thought he saw a person on his property, started yelling at the person, and then found out quickly it wasn't a person. So great show plan for you tonight. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Well, let's get to it tonight. Gavin, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you.
And if you would, kind of walk us into your encounter. It happened in Washington State, is that correct?
Yes. Actually in Eatonville, Washington.
Oh, Eatonville.
Yep.
I gotcha. And so what were you doing? And kind of just walk us into what you experienced.
Okay. Yeah, so basically I went out to Washington to to go to my dad's house because he had to move out there for Air Force business. And so we went out there, and I've been fascinated with Bigfoot and Sasquatch and the whole works, I guess. And I really wanted to get out and do some hiking when we were there. So I went on the BFRO website and found an encounter in Eatonville at Michelle Falls. So we decided to go there and check out the place because the encounter said that these three men were out walking around the railway that goes through there, and they were walking along and looked down at the falls and saw basically a Bigfoot crouched down drinking out of the river. So we decided to go out there and just hike around, and I would do a couple knocks, a couple calls and stuff. And we're hiking around, and the road is set up where the road cuts through the hill, and up to the right it just goes up at a slant, and then down to the bottom, it goes down, to the left, it goes down, and basically in there, it's dark. It's just a big canopy from the trees, and it's dark, and something like you would see in a horror movie, kind of. Up to the right, it's just looks like a good place to camp, like a simple place you would go to camp and stuff. We got up there, and we're hiking around, and after I did a call, we could hear this car that drove by on the road. Right after the car drove by on the road, just the weirdest sound followed after that. And it was like kind of a scream. I thought it was a car, but it sounded like just a scream. We were freaked a little bit. We stood there and basically I asked my dad if that was a car, and he said, no way, that was not a car. And I asked my older brother, and he said that was not a car.
What made you think it was a car?
Just the sound of it. It sounded like a car, like the tires on the road. You know what I'm talking about? Like when they are, like if you're standing by a road and the car's driving by and going fast and stuff. It sounded like that, but it was different than that. That's why it was strange.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So after we stood there, we just kept on going down the trail and kept on doing calls and knocks and got to a part of the trail before the falls, and I did a grunt kind of growl call that I do. And after that, we walked for maybe not even a minute down the ridge in the dark area. Just out of nowhere, this big thing breaks through the forest, and it just is going full bore basically at us. We're all standing there wondering what the heck's going on because it's just coming up, and you can hear twigs snapping and leaves going. We just basically freaked, and my dad said, "Get behind me." And we all got behind him, after that, he pulled out his 9mm pistol for his Air Force stuff, and I had a like a 12-inch survival knife or something that I had, and I pulled that out because I didn't know what was coming up the ridge. Just the sound of it and how big it was running up the ridge towards us, charging us basically. And after that, it was basically running up the ridge, but stopped short where we couldn't see it. It just stopped short, and we just stood there behind our dad. And he had his gun ready to go and stuff. And after listening to the show, basically getting to know stuff from the show, I know that gun would have done nothing to the Bigfoot.
What did your dad think it was?
He didn't know at the time, because he's actually into Bigfoot like I am. Because I just recently got 4 books on it and on Bigfoot and stuff, and I listen to the podcast all the time, love the show, and he didn't know what it was, but he just said, "Get behind me." So we just stood behind him. I stood a little bit to the side of him, and I had my knife ready, but it was just a freaky time for us.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Sounds like it was a terrifying time. Do you think it was responding to your call? Do you think that's what caused it to come?
I think that's what it was. I wonder. I've thought about it, and because I was doing a lot of calls and wood knocks and stuff, and I wonder if, since I did that growl, it kind of aggravated it and decided to run up the ridge towards us.
Interesting story, interesting encounter. I can imagine how terrifying that would be to be sitting on the ridge top like that, doing a call. You know, that's why a lot of times I warn people when they do calls, and I've been guilty of it myself, but a lot of times you don't know. You might end up pissing these things off, and they might just, it's kind of one of those moments where be careful what you wish for, because it might just happen. It's interesting, though, that it stopped right before it, stopped within the tree lines and never came out in the open.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing. I thought about just walking closer to the ridge to see if it was there. And after I think about it, it's like, I don't know if I want to do that, because what if it had a rock, or like a log, and was going to throw it up at us?
Yeah, or just come out in the open. It's interesting, too, its behavior. If it was a bear and it was rushing in like that, generally they don't stop. Bears don't stop. If they're going to come in, there's going to be an altercation. They're going to keep coming, and you're going to have to deal with it. And most wild animals are like that. If they're going to choose to fight like that, they're going to come in and, maybe it was just there was multiple of you guys and it caused it to stop. It's kind of a shame you never got a good look at it, though.
Yeah. I'm waiting for that time to have a good sighting.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's coming.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's coming. But it's one of those things, man. Be careful what you wish for, because
true.
When it happens, you might change your mind on it.
Yeah. After listening to this show for about a year now, it's just the stories and stuff. It's mainly that. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to the show, man. And thanks for letting me interview you on your encounter. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up is Peter. And Peter, thanks for coming on, man. I really do appreciate you being here tonight.
Well, thank you.
And you had a very interesting encounter. I really enjoyed reading it. I posted it up to the blog. And if you would, just kind of start from the beginning. The encounter happened several years ago. But just kind of tell us what you were doing, tell us where you were at, and just walk us right into the encounter.
Yeah, it was about 40 years ago, actually. I was like about 23 years old. I had just moved to South Lake Tahoe, and I lived in, wasn't quite the town of South Lake Tahoe, was in a little town called Myers. It's just if you come down off of Highway 50 over Echo Summit, and there's this little town down there at the bottom of the hill, and that's where I lived. And I had bought a house up there. I was planning to move up there, and I eventually did temporarily. And it was then that I was just happened to be standing out on my front porch looking down by the river. Now, about maybe 850 to 900 feet away, at the very most, was the Upper Truckee River. About 150 feet away was this row of small pine trees, about 7-8 feet tall. And I was just sitting there looking through the trees, and I saw somebody walking down there. And the thing of it is, it was warm out. This guy had it was at the edge of my focus range on where I could see real clear. And the guy had something. It was like a onesie. It was like a whole jumpsuit with a hoodie on, and it was like all brown, solid brown. And the guy was just walking along like nothing was going on, just kind of staring at stuff. And I saw him down there, and the only reason that what I did is I ended up shouting and whistling and waving my hands and saying, "Hey, how you doing?" was because there was nobody in the area at the time. And so I finally saw somebody, and I just wanted to say hi, and this guy freaked out. I mean, it's like somebody just slapped him, and he just whipped around and looked at me where the sound came from, and he backed into this tree. And then he spun around, and here's where I thought something was strange. When he spun around, his shoulder was at the same level, just where it starts to slope down from the top, not the top of the shoulder, but at the end of the shoulder, is where the tree hit him. The top of the tree hit him. And I knew that those trees were 7-8 feet tall. And it something kind of clicked in my head. I didn't know quite what it was until this thing turned around and it ran like as fast as a deer could run. I mean, he just disappeared and turned around and went about 150 feet to this little Truckee River, Upper Truckee River there, and he was across that in one step and disappeared in the brush on the other side, just boom. And I said, well, and it kind of dawned on me what I had just seen, because I just kind of went, well, cuss word. I didn't quite know what to do. And so the instant I thought of that, after the guy left, I just bailed off the front porch and went straight for the tree. I didn't want to take my eyes off it because I didn't want to lose it. So I crawled over logs and all sorts of stuff getting to this thing. I finally get there, and this tree is about 8 foot tall. And the reason I knew that is because I'm 6'3", and I can palm an 8-foot ceiling on a house. And so when I did that, I held my arm, I butted right up to the tree and reached up, and the top of the tree was about an inch above the palm of my hand. And that's where the shoulder hit on this thing. And there wasn't anything where like he would jump up on a rock or jump up on a branch that would make it seem taller. It was just a straight level shot right up to the edge of the tree. Interestingly enough, if you measure, I measured straight across from my shoulder where the tree had touched its shoulder to where the center of my chest was. I measured straight across from shoulder to shoulder, and in the center, I measured up to the top of my head. Now, that's about 14 and a half to 16 inches. I'm not quite sure. And if this thing is that tall, well, then it stands to reason that it's probably more than that. So it's about 1.5 feet above where it met his shoulders, from where the tree was to the top of its head. So that would make it. That would be 9.6. That's amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. Let me ask you, when you were looking at this thing, at what point did you realize, okay, that's not a jumpsuit, okay, that's not a hood, okay, that's not a man?
Where it clicked in is when, after I yelled, and it turned and went like that, and the palms of his hands came up, and I realized that the brown and the jumpsuit went down on top of his hands, but when he pulled them up, there wasn't any hands, but there was fur around it. You know, it's a long distance, and I really didn't see it. But when this guy backed up, he had the palms of his hands up, and he just kind of backed into the tree because he was totally caught off guard just seeing me. And I couldn't understand why a person would freak out that much with somebody just saying hello.
Yeah.
And this.
Were you able to see any facial expressions? I realize you're at quite a distance.
Yeah, I figured I'm looking at a Google Earth picture of where my house is. It's still there, the front porch of my house, and to where this thing was, it was a good 600 feet. And that's like from me from where I am right now, if I stand out front and look down the hill to the bottom of the hill. And if I look down there and I can see people walking across there, I can't see facial expressions. But I can tell that they're wearing clothes. I can see enough of that to not maybe recognize the person, but I could actually see what it was, who they were.
I gotcha. So yeah, you see this thing, it's quite a distance away, and like anything else, you can read a body language, and this thing's freaking out. And
yeah.
It sounds like Bigfoot really wasn't on your mind because you thought it was a person with a hood on. And
I really did. All I saw was a guy down there, and I hadn't seen anybody for the last day and a half, and so I just said, I just want to talk to somebody, so I just kind of waved and shouted and whistled, and I was totally unprepared for what it did, not only freaking out, backing into a tree, but I can't see somebody being 9'6". Let's just, even if I was off by a foot, 8.5 feet tall. You don't see many 8.5 foot tall human beings turn around and run as fast as a deer. I mean,
right.
This thing disappeared. I mean, boom, 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 gone.
So you ran up to the tree, and then what happened next? What happened after you went and you found the tree it had backed into? What did you do next?
I looked for footprints, but unfortunately, it was hardpan, and there was no footprint. Even if I stomped down, I couldn't make a footprint. There was nothing in the tree, like hair or fur or anything. I went down to the river, and where evidently it went across, it was solid rock at certain points, and it went across, and I couldn't quite remember where it went across the river exactly from where I was there. But I couldn't find any footprints or couldn't see very far into the brush. Now, at this point in time, that whole area has changed. Evidently, maybe there was a fire that went through there or something, but there's not as many trees as there was when I was there. But,
what's going through your mind at this point? I mean, you see this thing. I can just picture myself in your shoes. You're saying hi to someone. You're in the middle of nowhere, really. It's 1975, so Sasquatch really isn't. No one's really talking about it.
I was familiar with Bigfoot and Sasquatch. I read a book when I was in Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life, and it had stories of all sorts of sightings all over the world, and I was kind of interested in that. But it never occurred to me until I saw the height of this thing and how fast it moved. And I said, figured that's what I saw. So I said, well, maybe I can catch it coming around the other side. So I ran back to my house, got into my car, and drove around to this. There's a bridge that goes across the river and then gets to the other side. And there was about 3 houses in there. And 2 of the houses, I knocked on the door, and they didn't want to have anything to do with me because they didn't like strangers. So, I got out of there, and I went and finally knocked on the last house's door, and the guy came to the front, and I said, I'm not trying to freak you out. I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to stand out here. I'm just going to ask you, have you seen something? And I told him, blah, 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 what I saw. And he says, oh, you've seen them. And I said, them? And he says, I've seen them about this time of the year every year for a couple years. And so he says, but if you tell anybody I told you so, I'll deny it. And I said, well, I can understand that. I won't say anything. So I left it at that, but at least I knew I hadn't been crazy, and I hadn't seen something that wasn't there.
Yeah.
So,
did he tell you what he thought they were?
He says he didn't quite know what they were. He says, but he'd hear wood knocks and whoops and stuff like that. And every once in a while, he would hear growls off in the distance, but they weren't very close to him. So, but he could hear a deep growl, like something much bigger than what a dog. He had dogs, and he says that growl was way deeper than anything the dog could produce. So he says it was very. He didn't quite want to really talk to me about it because the more he talked to me, the more nervous he got about it, and so he kind of said, "I got to go."
Yeah, it's kind of a funny reaction when you talk to people that you get from them. What did you do next? What happened after this? I mean,
well, I sat there and I said, well, I mean, I talked to a guy who knew what I was talking about and had seen them, and he acted like he didn't want to have anything to do with it. I said I could imagine what it would be like if I told somebody who wouldn't believe me no matter how much I tried to explain it. And so I kind of kept quiet about it literally it didn't freak me out, or else I probably wouldn't have went for the tree. In retrospect, maybe it wasn't the smartest thing to do, to go there and to look at that, but I had to find out, because I'd never seen anything like that, and I needed to know that I wasn't nuts. So I went in there and looked, and sure enough, it was what I thought it was. It was a somebody or some creature that was about 9.5 feet tall, and there was nothing. So I had seen it, and if I told somebody, I don't think anybody at that time, in 1975 or maybe it was 74, I'm not quite sure, but if I had told anybody, they would never have believed me, and it would have put me on the he's a nut list.
Right.
So.
Yeah, well, you're definitely not on the nut list. More and more people are seeing these things. And it's interesting, too, because, a lot of encounters I get are from 20, 30, 40 years ago, where people are just now starting to come out and say, hey, you know what, I saw this back in the 70s, or I saw this back in the 80s. And it's interesting because I think more people have seen these things than what we hear about. Yeah.
In fact, I'm certain, because I went up to the Trinity, past Weaverville, along the Trinity River. We had some the family group up there for a 50th birthday, and I went up to the main gate where the guy who runs the whole place was, and this guy was upset about something, and so I asked him what was going on, and he says, and he begrudgingly said, well, see those dumpsters over there? And he says, I had to chase some Bigfoots away. He says, I don't want anybody getting hurt. So evidently a family of Bigfoots have been raiding his dumpsters from during the summer when the people are there. They have garbage and all the neat stuff we throw away, they just gobbled up.
Did it change your life at all?
Appreciably, not really. I went camping all the time. I've been in areas up in the Sierras where I was all by myself for a day or so, and it never really. I knew I was in an area where there was animal. There was, I put my stuff down at one end of the camp, and I went to the other end to set up my camp, and I came back, and there was fresh bear scat there. I had to arm myself after that because I really didn't trust being around a bear. But it never occurred to me that I would probably ever see one again or something like that again. So it happened so few and far between to anything that I've heard, so the odds were pretty slim that something would go wrong. You know what I mean? Lightning striking again.
Right.
So.
Well, be careful what you wish for, because it could happen. It could happen.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I've repeated that several times. I said I don't really want to see it again. But everybody says you kind of do, but you kind of don't, if you know what I mean. So
yeah,
it was. My life changed a little bit just knowing that. But I think keeping it inside for 40 years without telling anybody before. Just this last year is the first time I ever told anybody about it. And
what made you keep it inside?
I've talked to people who have seen them, who said they've seen them, and the reaction of the group of the people that I was around, they just ridiculed the heck out of them. So I just kept my mouth shut. I mean, I didn't like it, especially if you knew that no matter who you told about, the 99 out of 100 people would think you were crazy and would think you're nuts, you just wouldn't do it. So I just kind of stopped even thinking about telling anybody. And then finally I got to the age where I didn't really care anymore.
Yeah.
So I figured, they already think I'm nuts, so what the heck, yeah. So
yeah.
I figured I'd tell a couple of people, especially when something like that was brought up, and I just kind of added that this is what I saw. So, but it was an interesting thing.
Yeah, it is interesting, especially when you have an encounter like that. And it kind of shows you the reaction. That's why I loved your encounter so much. You caught this thing off guard. And I would imagine that we would have the same type of reaction if the tables were turned. If you were out just walking and a Sasquatch starts yelling at you, I realize it was a friendly, hey, you thought it was a person in the beginning. But
oh yeah, I would have beat feet.
Yeah.
And the Sasquatch started yelling at me and whistling and stuff like that, and I'd get out of there.
Let me ask you, how long did you live in that property?
Not too much longer. My job that I had up there bombed out, and so I had to come back down to the Bay Area for work. I was only up there, maybe 5 or 6 months at the most. I think it was almost 6 months, yeah. But after that, I was, when I lived up there, I was always careful because I I know the difference. You know, somebody says, well, you could have seen a bear. I'm sorry. I went out to the corner of the house to dump my garbage, and a mother bear and her cubs were eating out of my trash can, and so I just kind of pivoted and went back in the house. I know what a bear looks like, and this was not that. So.
Yeah, I find that offensive when people say that. You know, I've had talked to so many people and so many encounters. You know, what you hear on the show is probably about 25% of the people I actually talk to. And that's one thing that comes up most is they'll try and tell people, either family, friends, you know, whatever it is, whatever the case may be. And they'll say, well, you probably saw a bear. And I almost think that's kind of offensive. You know, even a person who is not a woodsman sees something like this and knows the difference between a bear and what's not a bear.
Yeah, I would hope so. They look nothing alike.
No, they look nothing alike. You know, and I've had hunters
I've listened to your encounter. I've listened to the recording of the interview that you had, and about your encounter, and mine was nothing like that. Mine was just the polar opposite of what yours was. Yours was kind of threatening, and mine was kind of like I was the one threatening, evidently. So
yeah, your encounter is the one I'd rather have than my encounter.
Heck yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah, that would have been unsettling for me for a long time. So.
Yeah, and I find it interesting too. I realize at 600 yards, you know, you can still see, you know, and honestly, I get what you're saying about, like, when you say, hey, I thought I had a hood on, I thought it was a jumpsuit. At 600 yards, I think most people would think that. It was all one color.
600 feet.
Or 600 feet. I would have loved to have seen the reaction, its body language, how...
You should have seen it. I mean, it just... You know, like his hands went up like, Lordy, Lordy. And he just backed into this, and and his mouth dropped open. I remember his mouth dropping open. And then all of a sudden, he realized that he should get out of there, and boom. Because the shock, he stood there for a couple of seconds while the shock took place that he was discovered, and he turned around and ran. And when he ran, man, he ran with swiftness and very much speed. Man.
Yeah, and that's a part of the encounter when you realize really quick, okay, it's not a bear, it's not a person. In a blink of an eye, they're gone. I mean, they're that fast. And most people who haven't seen one, it's hard to comprehend that, and I get it. But when you see one of these things take off, it's like the blink of an eye, and they're gone.
Now, what struck me was he had shoulders that, you know, I have my shoulder to shoulder, so I'm about 2 feet across. And this guy was half again to almost double in the shoulders than me. I mean, because when I was watching him, he was he was a profile side when I saw him at first. And I didn't notice how large his shoulders were until he backed up against a tree and was looking straight at me.
Yeah, that's one thing that most people say when they have seen these things. And that's, to be honest with you, people ask me about my encounter all the time. And the shoulders is the thing that got me. I didn't realize how big the shoulders were. I mean, the creature itself was huge, don't get me wrong. And that's terrifying in itself. But for whatever reason, when you look at the shoulders, they're just huge. And that's the main thing. Yeah, they're just unbelievable.
Yeah, and it did. This one had a crown head, had a cone head kind of, you know.
Yeah.
He had that typical cone head that I hear about. It was something that it didn't strike me until I heard other people describe it. You know, some of the people. I've been listening to your show. I'm a fairly new listener, and you have people on there that describe them, and they describe them almost exactly like the way I saw it.
Yeah, the cone head. Yeah, it's definitely It's a very fascinating encounter, and I can't imagine holding that in for 40 years. I just can't imagine it, man. I mean, I would.
Yeah, it drove me nuts. And my parents, they were, my dad always says, anybody who sees one of those has got to be off his rocker, blah, blah, blah. So I never told him. Never told my mom, because mom's the same way. And so I and I kind of got I close friends who know I don't really lie at all. They kind of said, "Oh, you think you saw something, but I don't think you saw what you saw." That kind of thing. It's like,
yeah, I get lost when people say that too, because why would you make that up?
Yeah, I mean, why would I open myself up to ridicule if I did that kind of thing? If I told you what I saw, why would I? If I knew going in that 99% of the time people are going to think I'm nuts and not believe me and think I'm crazy from then on, why would I bring that up? Just because I'm not I don't like to be ridiculed. I know hardly anybody does.
Yeah, no one does. Yeah. And it's frustrating too, because there's a lot of great encounters out there. There's a lot of people who have not only great encounters, there's people who have these things on video. There's people who have these things, have some of the best audio you've ever heard, some of the best videos you've ever seen, but they don't want to come out with it because they just get beat up. And I never really understood that until I went through my own personal public flogging, you know what I mean? To where
I can imagine.
To where I kind of get why people don't come out and share things. It's and it's kind of a shame, really. But I'm glad that people like yourself are coming forward and they're sharing what they're seeing. They're sharing their experiences because, especially on the show, and the show has always been about people's encounters for the most part. I would say 99% of the show is people's encounters. The guest is the star of the show. It's not me. It's not any co-host I have. It's the guest on the show. And when people could choose to come forward and share their encounters, you'd be amazed. I get so many emails from people after a guest has been on and say, you know what, I saw that too. Here's kind of what I saw. Here's kind of what I experienced. And I think the more and more people come forward, it's going to get to a point to where it's going to be ridiculous for any sort of government cover up, for any more ridicule. It's just going to be.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure the thought behind the government covering it up. There has to be something different about that that we don't know about, that they want to keep us from knowing that, or if they are indeed just non-believers and they just think we're stupid, so they're trying to keep us from panicking people. So.
Well, I think the government always thinks we're stupid. But we're the sheep, you know what I mean?
I've talked to a forest ranger, and he says, believe me, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I'm not there. This was years later, something like 20 years later. Somebody asked Bigfoot, and the guy said, well, believe me, I've seen him up there in the wilderness area, El Dorado. It's over on Echo Summit, and way back up in there, it's the wilderness area, El Dorado Forest wilderness area, and he goes back up in there, and he's seen them. So.
Yeah, of course they have. I've talked to a lot of park rangers. I've talked to a lot of people in the different departments of the government. They'll say, yeah, they exist. Next question. So, I mean,
yeah.
It
they
goes
get
on.
in trouble if they keep telling people that.
Yeah.
If it gets out that they've been telling people, they usually get in trouble.
Yeah. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I can't thank you enough for sharing your encounter. Have been excited all day to talk with you. It was one of the coolest encounters I think I'd ever heard, and I love the fact that you caught this thing off guard. And
yeah, it just blew me away, you know. That it was different than anything else I heard anybody talk about, and I just kind of thought I'd put my 2 bits in to see to make sure that at least I got it off my chest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you getting it off your chest. You know, it's like I said, every little encounter helps. Every little encounter, people share like yourself. I'm telling you, they say for every one encounter, there's 10 people who've had encounters that don't say anything. I think it's more like for every one encounter, there's 100 people that have had encounters that don't say it.
I think it's more like that. Yeah, definitely. Because you never hear about it because people just don't appreciate that kind of frankness when somebody says they've seen something that hardly anybody can believe or has seen before. And so to put up with ridicule is just not worth it.
Yeah, for most people it's not.
Yeah.
Well, Pete, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. I enjoyed it very much. Good talking with you.
Oh, it was great talking with you. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Hope your weekend's going well. It's Sunday. I know preseason's almost over with, and the regular football season is starting, and I can't wait for that. I got a great show planned for you tonight. I have 2 guests that I'm bringing on. My first guest is Skip, and he's from Texas. He's a pastor down there in Texas. He had an encounter back in 1987. I want to say he was in his late teens when he had this encounter. And it's a very fascinating encounter. It's a Sasquatch that burst out of the bushes and then took off at a ridiculous speed. And as you listen to the encounter, it makes you wonder, was the Sasquatch sitting there watching him the whole time? Or was he just at the right place at the right time and they crossed paths? My second guest tonight is Jack McCarty, and he's the author of Bigfoot Evidence, I Cannot Deny It. It's a short book, but it's a very interesting book because Jack puts in there a lot of the pictures he's taken with tracks. He shares a lot of his evidence, and he shares a lot of his encounter stories, as he will tonight. A very fascinating book. If you get a chance, check it out. It's on Amazon.com. Again, it's called Bigfoot Evidence, I Cannot Deny It by Jack McCarty. You know, as Jack and I were talking the other day, one thing I wanted to share with the audience, one of the things, you hear a lot of these Bigfooters, they go out and they try and mimic Bigfoot calls. We've seen it on Finding Bigfoot. You hear a lot of Bigfoot researchers talking about it. And actually how Jack had his encounter is how I would imagine you would actually call in a Sasquatch. Sasquatch is a predator. Make no mistake about that. It's at the highest level of predator out there. And what Jack was actually doing was he was doing these calls of a wounded animal, wounded bear, wounded rabbit, and that brought in the Sasquatch in a couple of his encounters. And so it made me think, you can get a lot of these calls. You can buy them down at your local sports place. You can get the wounded rabbit, you can get the wounded bear, and you can do these calls while you're out there. So if any of you are out there listening and you're wanting to bring in a Sasquatch, I'd recommend going and getting one of these wounded animal calls. I would do it near water, and I would go out and try and do some of these calls. I'm going to try it myself. But please, 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 if you go out there and do this, please go armed, because you may bring in other predators too as well. Because all predators are looking for easy meals. And when they hear these calls, they'll come to you. And there's more than just Sasquatch out there that can get you. But if you get a chance, try it out. I'm going to try it out. Might even take my handy cam out and post it up on the blog. See if I have any success with it. Speaking of the blog, if you go to SasquatchChronicles.com, last week I've been trying to post more videos. Even with my ugly mug, I've been trying to post more videos on there. And I did an interview with Trey McAllister. He went out to a property, found footprints, found a ton of hair, found twisted trees, sent me photos of all of the evidence that he collected. I invited him to come on. We did a quick YouTube video showed his evidence. He talked about where he collected his different pieces of evidence around this property. So if you get a chance, check that out. One of the other things I posted as a video, the Browns had sent me this photo. I've had it in my possession for a long time, but Sarah said it was okay to go ahead and post it. And it appears to be, I'll say, a figure popping its head above the brush. It kind of looks like a gorilla popping its head above the brush. But if you get a chance, check that out too. I posted that Friday on the website, SasquatchChronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me, wes@SasquatchChronicles.com. Well, I want to welcome Skip to the show. Skip, thanks for coming on tonight, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be able to talk about this.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. Now, your encounter happened out there in Texas, is that correct? Back in '87?
Yeah, I live in a place in Texas. If you look at a map where the Gulf Coast, where Texas curves the whole way down the Gulf of Mexico, we live just about exactly a little less than halfway down. They call it the coastal bend because of that, but we're about 30 miles off the coast. And grown up here all my life, and we have a lot of oak tree type woods around the rivers and stuff. But then there's a lot of what you would think of South Texas, which is cactus and thorny mesquite trees, and a lot of real tough country.
Yeah, it is tough country down there. Now, you were what, 18, 19 during the time?
Right. I was about 19 years old. I've always hunted and fished my entire life. A lot of my friends as well. And we have right outside of town is a creek that basically runs for a lot of miles, and they ended up making a reservoir out of this too. But this creek is a very seasonal flow type creek. When it gets really hot in the summer, it kind of dries up to where there's just pools and things. But then, sometimes of the year it's moving, quite a bit. But what makes this such a different thing is it's got very sandy bed. It's almost like a beach, very light colored sand. In fact, a lot of the golf courses actually come down to this area to get a lot of sand for the sand traps and stuff. And so we would take our Jeeps down there, ATVs down there, and ride on the sand a lot. We would fish there, swim, and it was just one of those areas where a lot of high school kids and college kids would go for, just for fun. Big groups of people would go there.
I gotcha. So kind of walk us into what you were doing and just walk us right into the encounter.
Well, what I did was, it was probably late summer. I actually was going down there sort of on a date, believe it or not, and had kind of done this thing with a picnic where I had some food and basket and stuff like that. But what happened was, for a long time, you were able to take your vehicle down on the sand like I was talking about. But at some point, I guess some people complained or something, and they put these giant concrete barriers up to where you could not drive down there anymore. So what happened is, if you wanted to go down there, you had to park up by where there was a bridge and then walk down under the bridge and then down wherever you wanted to go. So that's what we did. It's hard to try to explain this in words, but where the creek is in the very sandy area is spread out for, 150, 200, 300 yards at some point. And then on both sides, the land rises up probably 12, 15 feet to the regular, pasture and ground areas where there's fences and they keep cattle and stuff like that. And where we parked, we walked up on the top part probably for a while, and then we went down the bank and across a really wide, beachy area. And that was a good spot that I had fished several times before and kind of set up the little area there. And this was probably already, probably about 7:15. So it was an hour before the sun went down. So it was a little cooler, because, it's brutal hot here in August. Just out there, eating, stuff like that, and it started getting dark. And I started kind of gathering some stuff together. And she stepped away for a second to, have to go to the restroom or something like that. And I said, hey, I'm going to take a load up to my Jeep up here. So I grabbed a big armful of stuff, and I think I had a cooler and some other stuff, and started walking. Well, to get back up to the high area, there was probably a empty space of sand that was, at least 75 yards across, if not maybe even a little bit more. And it was just no bushes or anything in this area. It was just a sand bed. And I just started across that, and I kind of heard like a grunt maybe, like an exhale, but it was just real deep sounding, and it made me stop. And I just instantly wrote it off as maybe a bull or a cow up by the fence line, because they were all around everywhere. And I just wanted to make sure there wasn't one loose down there with me, because I've been chased by a couple of bulls, and that's no fun. But I kind of looked and didn't see anything, so I started again, and I heard it again, but this time I looked up, and from the area where I was walking to go up, something kind of just burst out of the where the fence was and some of the trees, and it was running upright, came down the hill in two steps, where I would go really slowly down it because it was so steep. It just came flying down, hit the sand, completely dark all the way, flew across this open 75 yards of sand, and came up to where the actual water of the creek was, and its strides were really long. And then right before it got to the water, what was a cool part that I don't know why I remember this so well, but it shortened its steps, I guess, to get its jumping foot the right way, but it shortened its steps, jumped across probably 12-foot stream, and it made it, but the other side was a little steeper, and its foot just completely dug into that bank all the way up to almost its calf, I guess, area, and then jerked it out and continued back up and went up the other side. And I was just completely frozen, stunned. I couldn't believe what I just saw. And right about that time that it hit that other side and went up, I heard the girl I was with said, "Who was that?" I turned around and I said, "Did you see that?" And she goes, "Yeah, who was that? Was it somebody messing around?" And I guess I was smart, because I did not say what I thought it could be. I just said, "I don't know. I guess some people running around out here." I did not go up and come back. I just went and grabbed stuff with her, and then we walked back up, and I was shaking. I was trying to kind of hide how scared I was, and went up, got in the Jeep, didn't see anything else, and drove away. And I got up the next day and drove straight back there and went straight back to where I was, and completely saw the area where it dug into the bank. There wasn't any detailed of any kind of print or anything, but I just wanted to just see it in the daytime, make sure I wasn't just trying to, put stuff in there that I'd saw. But here's the crazy thing, Wes, that makes me really believe that I actually saw one of these creatures, because I wasn't able to see a lot of detail except that I thought that I saw a lot of hair. It was very dark, and it was bipedal. It probably wasn't. It was probably my size or a little bit bigger. I certainly didn't notice that it was some 8 or 9 foot thing. It was probably about 30 yards, 25, 30 yards from me at dusk. Here's the thing, though, that makes me know that I cannot say that it was a human. That sand is so deep, and when I say deep, it probably comes up. When you walk across it, you sink down probably 6 to 8 inches of your leg in it. And if you've ever walked in sand like that, coming down a sand dune or something, it's incredibly difficult to walk across that. That's why we would take our ATVs and Jeeps down there to go through it, because you could just do all kind of crazy stuff with vehicles because it was so deep. And lots of my friends were athletes in school, track runners, and I've seen them hundreds of times moving around on top of that sand. And to say running across that would be difficult is an understatement. It's slow, plodding steps. The sand goes out from under your feet. And the speed at which this thing covered this was indescribable. It would have been the equivalent of somebody sprinting on a track speed. Didn't even react like there was deep sand there at all. And that's why I know that it wasn't just a normal thing. That's what gave me that feeling like, man, you're seeing something that maybe that you're not supposed to see, or it's just that feeling inside that just instantly made my adrenaline spike, where you start shaking. That's the part to me that stuck with me the whole time, is how fast that it moved. And that, I guess I don't know about a running 12 or 15 foot jump. I'm not sure if that's a super long jump or anything like that. I'm not saying that's what was so amazing. It's just the speed at which it covered it is what stuck with me, of how fast it was.
Was it running on 2 legs the whole time?
It was running on 2 legs the whole time, and arms were down by its side. It was not pumping its arms like a runner would. You know how you would, a human running would be using its fist, to pump in front of them when they run. This thing's arms are down by its side, which was weird as well. And it was huffing as it was running, so it was making a very low, like a ho, 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 like every time that it breathed. So that's all I could hear. It didn't make any other kind of sound. It was just breathing very heavy, and it had maybe a little bit of a sound to its breathing that it would. I look back on this now and all the things I know that I've, listened to the show so many times and all this, and now I second guess myself, man, should I have called out, made a noise, try to make it stop to where I could have seen it more? Man, should I have followed it, kind of a thing? All these different things that come into my mind. Of course, back then there was no cell phones or digital cameras or any of that. I didn't have any of that kind of stuff. It was just I don't even know how we survived without digital stuff back then, but we did.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder. It sounds like you almost startled the thing and it took off running. Yeah, like it was sitting there watching you guys, and then you startled it.
That's what I thought of. That's exactly what I've always asked myself. Was it watching us the whole time? Nothing that I can think of seemed weird ever. Or maybe was it just one of those, maybe it was coming down to the water at the exact same moment that I was, going to start walking back up, and we just ended up crossing paths. I don't know. The more I listen to different encounters and things like that about how aware they are of their surroundings, I probably would lean toward that it was watching us, and maybe when I got up and left, maybe it felt like I was maybe putting it in a corner of where it wanted to go or something like. I don't know that. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about that, but just pretty unbelievable. I can't say 1,000% that that's what it was, because it was so fast and so dark that I couldn't see a face, and I think that may be my main defining moment if I saw one. But when I put when I put all the arguments and asked all the questions, it just had to be, just because of all the things I saw, especially about how fast it was, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing with when you see something like that. I mean, did your girlfriend at the time, or the person you're with at the time, did she ever go, I don't think that was a person, or did you guys ever talk about it when you left?
No, actually, she still lives around this area, and I probably ought to ask her at some point, because I made sure that we did not talk about that once we got in, because, man, if I would have probably said what I thought it was, that would have been probably the first and last time I would have ever taken a girl down there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No,
but it was, very weird. I don't know. That's one of the things that I question myself. I should have said, hey, I should have asked her, what did you just see? I just know she saw something, because she said, who was that? And I said, did you see that? And she said, who was that? And I said, I don't know. It's probably somebody screwing around down here. But I knew good and well it probably wasn't somebody, you know. One other thing I can tell you, just besides knowing that it wasn't super, super tall, is it was very slim, too. It was not some wide thing that people talk about. It was definitely athletic and slim.
Yeah, a lot of the reports I get from that area that you had your encounter, and the Texas area in general, you don't really get the monster size Sasquatch. A lot of people describe them as kind of having a runner's build and being, I would say 6 to maybe 8 feet tall. Of course, there's always exceptions. You always have people that come forward and say, hey, I saw King Kong. But I would say for the most part, the average size is between 6 and 8 feet tall. And a lot of people describe them as being kind of a runner's build. Not really, bigger than an average person, but not huge. You know what I mean? Not the bodybuilder monster.
Right. Well, and that I would definitely say this was more of a runner's build. And I'll tell you one thing that maybe solidified my opinion on what I saw is this was like, 87-ish there. And when I had already, started in my work and I'd had kids and stuff like that, I actually was, and actually when the internet kind of got popular, and started being on the computer and looking up stories and stuff, I found probably around 2003, 2004, found the BFRO. And when I went on there and went to regional sightings and I pulled up Texas, went down the counties by name, and I found my county in 1997, so it would have been 10 years after I saw it, and somebody put an encounter, the exact same bridge in the exact same spot where I had mine, that somebody put an encounter of that on there. So I was like, wow. So that was pretty wild. I was like, man, I wonder if they saw the same one, or if there were other ones right there too, because it's just right there by the same bridge that somebody saw one 10 years later.
Yeah, and it's interesting too down there in Texas, going back to the size. I get a lot of people who will contact me and go, I don't know if I saw a Bigfoot, but I think I saw an overgrown chimpanzee. Chimps don't have the gorilla size to them. But that's interesting. So you found people were having encounters in that exact same spot.
Yeah. And then I looked it up as well, and we have our neighboring county is Goliad County, and found 2 people that had separate encounters there. My best friend that's pastor with me here has beautiful ranch in Karnes County in Kennedy, which is 2 counties over, and they have not had anything per se there, but it's beautiful river bottom country, and I've been there, hunting many times. I've hunted, like I said, at all in different areas of South Texas my whole life with my dad and uncles and grandfather, and I've been very interested since I've become older of trying to figure out how these things would survive down here. And if just looking at what is possible for them to eat, it makes perfectly good sense to me that they wouldn't be these heavy giant things, because there's just how they would have to eat seasonally here. I think they would have to be slim. And as hot as it gets, I think everything about it, I always wondered if they would have less hair here because it would be so hot, and we have pretty mild winters, So just a lot of questions that it asked me that I have. I know back in the early 1900s, there was a legend around here called the Wild Man of the Navidad, which is another river that goes through our area. And there was a 5-year period of time where something was seen like crazy. There was I think there was it was newspapers, people hunted it. It was a big, big legend around South Texas, and it was called the Wild Man of the Navidad. And, I've done a lot of research. They still have that when they have parades down here in the little towns. They have a person all dressed up in a Bigfoot costume, and they put it in a cage, and they say captured Wild Man of the Navidad. They have, so that was our big kind of legend down here. And, of course I've heard rumors of what that was and things like that, but I always, just wondered if that was a creature that happened to have a lot of encounters with people back then,
Yeah, that is interesting. There's definitely a rich history down there of Sasquatch. And it's interesting, too, because down there, and, the only thing I can really liken it to is like Washington State. It's kind of night and day when you talk to people. Down there, not a whole lot of people really talk about it. But there's this long history. I mean, if you really start digging in down there, you can find this long history of these quote-unquote wild men, just as much as you have here in Washington State. But it's interesting,
but you're right, man. People will not talk about it. It's not something that you would just bring up here. And, just from the standpoint of it's not normal conversation. But, I've had plenty of relatives and friends that have cattle, and, just weird things happen that they automatically don't associate with that creature, but it very much could be, I guess, like having cattle that they know are pregnant, but then they show up and the calf is nowhere to be found, kind of a thing. Farmers around here, we have great deer population. I think if they survive here in a group, that it has to be in the river bottoms, is what we call it here, the floodplains, where all the rivers are. They just have to be. There's no way they can move from water sources like that, just because it gets so dry in the summer. So maybe they just move up and down South Texas through the river bottoms and migrate to where they find places,
Yeah. And going back to, you being a pastor, I'm sure you can see when a lot of people see how these things move, like what you witnessed and what your friend you're with, what she witnessed, how you see these things move. Sometimes people come right off and say it was paranormal. And can't you see how people would say that after what you saw and what you experienced? Not that you think it's paranormal, but I mean, it moved so freaking fast that it was like nothing you've ever seen before. Right. And I think as humans, we jump to that, but I really think these are a flesh and blood creature. You know what I mean? Especially in your situation, it just wanted to leave. It wanted out of there.
And I've read and listened to tons of encounters and things about the paranormal side of this, and I can 100% tell you that there was nothing like that happened when I was standing there. I mean, I saw it. I saw sand move, and I saw where its foot. It was not floating for sure. But I guess I can definitely see how people would think that, especially maybe if they never could see their feet because it was moving so fast, And also, me being a pastor, I've done just lots and lots of Bible studies, and in reading my Bible, I've researched, a lot of different opinions on things. And I know you dedicated a show, and I enjoyed it very much, by the way, on the whole, the whole opinion of the Nephilim type view on this thing, and listen to some different people. And, I don't really have an opinion one way or another on what that is. I think it's extremely interesting, and I like to hear different viewpoints of that. But definitely in my quick little encounter there wasn't anything paranormal about it. It was just something moving, breathing fast,
Yeah, just trying to get away.
Trying to get away. And not I don't think it ever really looked at me. If it did, I certainly didn't catch it. If it did, it was in mid-stride, didn't react to me at all. Of course, I was like standing there with a picnic basket and a cooler and probably a red and white checkered picnic cloth, looking like a moron standing there watching this thing. So I'm sure I didn't pose a threatening figure, standing there.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you liked the Nephilim show, man. I took a lot of heat for that Nephilim show. I got the impression most people hated it. I think either people hated it.
I liked it. Yeah.
Or they loved it.
I loved it. I just loved it because I just enjoy listening to, different views. I've heard, Ron Moorhead's sounds and things, and I think he hesitates to go all in on an interview of what he thinks it is, but I've got a sense of a lot of people think that that's what this is,
from the Bible. I mean, the Nephilim ruled the planet. They were gods and demigods, and these things are wild animals. I mean, they aren't gods, they aren't demigods.
Yeah, that's sort of my argument is exactly too. If that's what it was, it certainly wouldn't be trying to eke out a living in the little scattered forests of the United States, I don't think.
Yeah. And it sure as heck wouldn't have ran from you if it was an actual Nephilim. I mean, they're going to turn around.
Well, there you go. Yeah, there you go. But, there's just not that many things down here where I can, I've often thought, I have a friend of mine that's kind of into this as well, and we've thought about possibly having someone come down to speak and to see if we could try to get more people to come out with some encounters or something like that. We just haven't had a chance to do any of that at all. But I certainly appreciate you talking with me, man. I like I said, I'm a major listener of the show and love listening to all the different encounters and stuff like that. What I really love the most, man, is when you have someone on that is maybe an authority type figure, or police officer or sheriff or park ranger, or you've had some of those on before and talked about different things like that. I like hearing that kind of stuff. I don't know if it adds a little bit of authenticity to it when somebody has that sort of a job that when they have, they talk about encounters and stuff like that you go, man, makes me think of that a lot of it's covered up as well.
Yeah, and I think it is. A lot of people you've heard in the past, they've asked to have their job titles not mentioned. I've had aerospace engineers on. I had one guy on, and I won't say what show it was, but I'm sure the audience listening to him thought he was just some hillbilly from the backwoods. This guy was aerospace engineer. He worked for NASA for several years, and all of that was left out of the show
Right.
So a lot of those, you're right. You get someone like that who wants to come forward and say, hey, I saw this, this, and this, but for whatever reason doesn't want to say what they do for a living. And I understand that. I get it.
Sure.
It does add more to it. And I have been working to get more law enforcement on. They're just as tough to get on as hunters. I would say hunters are even harder to get on than people in law enforcement, to be honest with you.
Right. Wow. I've never had any kind of experience hunting ever as far as that. I've seen a mountain lion once, which is really cool from my stand, but have not ever had any kind of thing like that,
Yeah.
So, as many hours and stuff as I've spent in deer stands and trees hunting, and I never see anything, but then I have a picnic and I see something. That's about I guess that's about pretty typical.
That's par for the course, man.
Yeah, there you go. But just an anxious person sitting here, just keep watching and learning and seeing what's going on,
Yeah. Well, Skip, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your encounter. It was an interesting encounter to hear, and it happens more than most people realize, and it happens to a lot more people that don't come forward. So thank you for coming forward and sharing your encounter.
Oh, my pleasure, man. I really, really appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Next on the show, I want to welcome Jack McCarty. Jack is the author of Bigfoot Evidence, I Cannot Deny It, and it's available on Amazon as an ebook. Highly recommend it. Jack, you got some great pictures in there. I enjoyed reading the encounters. Thought you did a great job overall on the book. I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And if you would, Jack, now you had 2 encounters. Let's start with the first one. Kind of tell us what you were doing. Walk us into what you saw.
Yeah, a friend and I like to bear hunt. And so we were headed out into a part of the Rogue River wilderness. And we went way back into these old logging roads. And I had found an old cabin back there and fruit trees. And they're still alive and producing fruit, and they're fed by a little spring. So we were walking around there investigating and looking for bear sign, and we came upon a tiny little pond, kind of like the size of a kid's swimming pool. It had salamanders in it and stuff, and it's fed by a little spring. And so we kept walking up the road, and it had a lot of down trees across it, and the grass was kind of high. And where the spring is, were a lot of trees. And we noticed that there were a bunch of about 20-foot tall trees that are, an inch and a half, 2 inches around, that were just knocked down and pushed down to the ground and just kind of torn up there. And so we kind of looked at that and then walked out farther, another 100 feet, and you could see a big, like a pine tree farm that the Forestry Service has. And they fence them all and so they can collect seeds and that kind of thing. And off to the right was the Rogue River, about 100 or 200 feet down the canyon. So we came back and walked down the road and noticed that this area where the trees were down, there were bear tracks there, and there was a huge hole in the trees and the bush and stuff. And so we realized that's a big bear that's playing around in there and tearing stuff up. And so we started looking around more, and we came onto a human type footprint that was, I have a habit of carrying around a tiny tape measure and, just kind of stuff so I can look at tracks and measure them. And this track was 17 inches long, 6 or 7 inches wide at the toe mark. and it was sunk in the ground about 1.5 inches or so. And it was just huge sitting right there. And so we both looked at it and thought, wow, there must be a couple bear in here. And one of them is just huge. And we noticed on the down tree that something had gotten on that tree and clawed bark in the back and in the front. And it was probably, 8 or 9 feet apart where the scratch marks were. As we looked around, we saw some scratch marks about 12 feet up a standing pine tree. And so we just, kept looking around, found a couple more big footprints, and the forest was so thick there. This is in southern Oregon.
Let me ask you, Jack, at this point, are you still thinking bear, or do you have a knowledge of Bigfoot and you're thinking, okay, well, this isn't a bear, this is a Bigfoot?
No, I'm really thinking this is just a giant bear. And they can get 500-600 pounds out in the forest, if they're in a really old forest type setting where they're not harassed a lot, and I'm thinking this is, just a huge bear. We started using a varmint call to call in bear and cougar like people use them for coyotes. And the forest was so thick that we didn't dare, because it would have been on us, without any notice. And so we just kind of left the area and kept wondering what is this thing? And it probably wasn't until a year or two later that I was at a wild, kind of an animal park on the coast of Oregon, and I'm looking at these big bear in this enclosure, and one of the workers came by, and so I was talking to him, and I said, well, how big are those bears? He said they're about 600 pounds apiece. And I looked at their hind feet, and they weren't any bigger than my size 10. So that's when I really started thinking, wow, this is this a Bigfoot footprint that we actually saw? And so it was kind of the start of us starting to look for more tracks and starting to investigate Bigfoot.
Was this the same time when you, on your way out, that you saw the creature standing by watching you guys?
No, that was a few years later, and we had gone into the woods to call for bear or cougar, whatever comes in, and when they do, they run in, and they're usually foaming at the mouth and popping their teeth, and they're hungry, and they're coming in to eat this animal. Well, when we got done, we were walking out, and we took a different trail than we normally did. I noticed this pine tree that was probably 20-some feet tall, but it was broke off at about 7 feet. I mean, just snapped off. It was probably 3 inches around and thrown off 20 feet away. And so we started looking around and found a track right at the edge where the toes kind of dug in the side of the trail. And I took pictures of it, and I bent down and I stuck my finger in to feel those toes, and they're bulbous just like ours. And so then we started looking around and saw more tracks, and they were 17 inches long, and they had a 6-foot stride. And we just were totally blown away by how big a stride it had, how big these were, and how it could just bust off a tree like that and throw it away. So when we got back in our vehicle, we were headed down the mountain, and I was a passenger, and I'm just kind of looking off the side of the road and at the trees, and we came to this big open area,
And way down at the bottom, probably, 200-300 feet down, I see this monstrous Bigfoot standing down there. He had one arm around a tree, and he's got another arm out, and he's looking at us go by. And he was humongous. He had muscles, incredible muscles, and he had a huge shoulders, and it was shocking, is what it was.
And what did you guys do? Did you guys stop? Or?
Well, by the time you get, a car stopped and back, I didn't think he would be there, because most animals, they'll see you go by, and you stop and back up, they're gone. And so I was so shocked, actually, that I was telling my friend, and he was kind of like, yeah, right. So we didn't stop and go back. I wish we had.
Can you describe the creature? Can you kind of describe how close were you when you drove by?
Oh, it was probably 200 or 300 feet. He's still ingrained in my brain. I would imagine if he was standing straight up, he was probably 8 feet or more. He probably had, I'd say, a good 3.5, 4 foot wide shoulders. His muscles on his arms just bulged. Kind of like you see a gorilla's arms, how big and muscular they are. And he was hunched over and looking at us, and he was all covered in hair. He had kind of a roundish face. I couldn't tell if he had a cone head, like people say, because his head was kind of back and he was looking up at us as we went by. Just monstrous.
Now, I didn't realize you're at 200-300 feet. Were you able to get any facial details?
Not real clear. And we were driving by in a car, so it was just a second or two.
Yeah.
I figured this in.
I didn't think you could, but I thought I'd ask anyways. You never know when you zero in on that.
Yeah.
And your friend at the time, he didn't want to go back? He didn't?
Well, we were probably a couple 100 feet down the road by the time I came to my senses and started telling my friend, stop. I think I just saw a Bigfoot. He didn't really want to stop, so.
Yeah. And now you had another encounter in 2007.
Yeah, that was in Utah, central Utah. I had just kind of moved there, probably had been a year or so. We were out on our four-wheelers going for a ride up this creek. So we went as far as we could until we hit snow and kind of had some real challenges with the snow on the hills and stuff. And so we turned around, and the sun was just going down over the mountains. It was still kind of light enough, And so as we were riding east, down along the creek, I came down a trail. And when I came down this trail that's right along the creek, and it's a small creek, probably 6-8 feet wide, I could see a fish or two darting around in the ponds, little pools. And as I came around the corner, I see an arm outstretched, and I see the hair is probably 2 or 3 inches hanging off this arm, and it's all lit up by the sun. So it's kind of a reddish golden color. And so I followed the arm down, and I saw its shoulder, and then its stomach, and then its legs. And it was doing the same thing that the other one did. It had an arm around a tree, and it was kind of hanging out with an arm outstretched, looking at me go by. I didn't really see a face on that one either. It was kind of shadowy back there, and the sun was just lighting it up. I slammed on my brakes and threw it in reverse and went back, and it was gone. And I turned off my motor, and I just sat there for 4 or 5 minutes trying to see if I could hear anything or, anything running through the brush, and there was nothing. I think it was a juvenile because it was about my size, about 5'6". I think it might have just gone back into the trees there where it was dark, because I didn't hear it running off. And normally you'd hear any animal usually breaking branches or whatever as they run off. So, I know it wasn't a bear, because I've hunted bears for 25 years, and I've seen them stand up, and it wasn't a bear. It was a human type form.
I'm looking through the book. I see the tracks of the bears. I see the tracks of the Sasquatch. You have some great evidence, especially with the tree twists, and some really good evidence that you have collected. As you've had your sightings, as you've looked into this, is there something that you've come across that was unique to these creatures that you found out through investigating all of this?
Well, they're not like your regular bear or cougar or bobcat or any of the predators. I really think it's a predator. It's at the top of the food chain. But the thing with a cougar or a bear, coyotes, whatever it is, if they make eye contact with you, they see you or smell you, they take off running, they're gone. You probably won't see it again. With a cougar will also, though, if it thinks it hasn't been seen, will hang out and watch you until you make eye contact with it or shoot at it. But and a Bigfoot will kind of hang out and do the same. I think they're really curious on what we do, and they can use their arms, their hands for tree knocking. They whistle like a human does. It's amazing how human-like they are. I mean, they can throw stuff. They're much more intelligent in that way than a regular animal is out there. They can, do a lot of things that we can do. And so, they warn people with the stick knocks, with throwing stuff at you. They'll even bluff charge you like, other animals do. A bear will bluff charge you. An elephant will do that to scare you off. I think if you hang around after that, you're in serious trouble. It's just interesting how they live, and they break these trees and they point them in different areas. They just do a lot of stuff that normal animals in the woods don't.
Do you still go out in the field?
Oh, all the time. All the time. We actively go out as often as we can because, for one thing, I want to see another one again. And I enjoy being out there and seeing what's out there by looking at tracks and just all kinds of evidence that's out there. My buddy and I really like to go. And we do it. And we still, call in bear and mountain lion, and we've had Bigfoot come into that call. They're an animal. They're hungry. They do just what the bear and the cougar do. They're going to come in and take that animal that's dying away from whatever's killing it.
Yeah, I think they're opportunistic, just like a bear, just like a cougar, just like almost any predator really is opportunistic. They're going to come in.
Yeah.
On the blog, I posted this hair, some of these hairs that Trey McAllister got from Tennessee. And he had posted a lot of footprints, a lot of tree breaks. He had sent me some pictures of hairs. Did you get a chance to look at those?
Yeah, I did. I just watched it last night.
What do you think about those hairs?
Yeah, they're definitely unusual. I could see hair on a barbed wire fence from an animal like that. You know, most deer, like a bear, wouldn't go through a barbed wire fence, but a Bigfoot could probably step over that fence and leave hair. And so he said he had some of the follicle on it. So that's good, you know, DNA evidence. Yeah, and see, he's smart to go out with gloves and baggies. I've carried Ziploc baggies for years and collected scat and different things. And, you know, you just turn it inside out, you grab it and zip it up, and you don't, you know, destroy or damage the evidence.
Well, yeah, and he even took him to a vet, had a vet look at him, and a vet was like, I have no idea what this thing is. I have no idea what this hair is. I've never seen anything like this before. And that's kind of the frustrating part. You know, when a lot of people come across evidence, and Trey did a great job out there with the way he collected the evidence and taking pictures, and he was explaining where he found this, where he found that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what do you do with all of that? What do you do with the evidence? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the hard part, is that, you know, what do you do unless you're rich? You know, you really can't do a whole lot with it.
Even if you're rich, though, you go and have it tested, and it comes back as, let's just say for the sake of argument, non-human primate, or
right.
primate, or let's say it comes back human, whatever anyone out there wants to call it.
Right.
Then what do you do with it?
Well, that's it, you know, and if you know, it's going to take somebody to shoot one and bring it in. What's going to happen to it at that point, who knows? But personally, I wouldn't shoot one unless it was attacking me, because I know they're out there. I know they're real, and I don't need to prove that to really to anybody. But it's going to take one for people to actually look at it, and some of these scientists and you know, forensic people to look at it, test it, and say, oh yeah, this is a Bigfoot. Otherwise, what do you do with it? I mean, I've had lots of scat that I brought home and stuck in the freezer, you know, and those kind of things. But after a year or 2 years, you think, well, do I really need this stuff in my freezer?
Right. Yeah. I think that would have been my first question before I put it in the freezer. But, you know, and that's the thing, is like, what do you do with evidence? You know, and I get a lot of heat. I get a lot of heat for saying that one needs to be shot, but at the end of the day, one needs to be shot. I hate to say, you got to be careful shooting one, but I'm starting to go off what John Green used to say. If you see one, you should shoot it, and shoot it with double-aught buck, and then go finish it off with a slug, and drag it in. I mean, it's very, and it's sad. It's don't you think it's frustrating? I mean, you're obviously a hunter. You're a woodsman. You've tracked bear. I can see it in your book where you've tracked bear, you track cougar. Have you tried tracking these things down and getting video evidence of them? I realize video evidence isn't going to be the end-all, be-all.
Right.
But have you ever thought about, hey, I'm going to track this thing down, and I'm going to try and get it on video?
You know, I have. I mean, I've got a bionic ear. I've got GoPro cameras. You know, I've got big cameras with, you know, video on it and everything. My challenge is getting somebody to go with me to follow that thing. You know, after they see the tracks or see one, you know, they don't really want to go track it down and get pictures of it. So I would love to. I mean, I've followed tracks into the woods yeah, that would be awesome to be able to do that.
After your 2 sightings, everyone has a theory on what these things are, and there's no right or wrong answer. But what is your theory after you've had your 2 sightings, looking at the tracks, looking at some of the evidence that you've looked at, some of the evidence you've actually put in your book? What have you theorized at this point?
Well, again, I think they're a predator. I think they're just an animal like any other animal that's put here on this earth that serves some kind of purpose. I don't know. And I think it's here to do whatever it's supposed to. I mean, it's definitely the top predator in the woods. It knows how to hide. It's very sneaky and sly, and it'll sit and watch you. It'll chase you away. It does a lot of the same things that the other predators do. I go out in the woods all the time. You hardly ever see a cougar or a bear. I've caught them, just kind of by accident, come around a corner and seen them. But, they know the minute you get out of your car when you're in the forest, any animals anywhere within hearing distance know exactly where you are and that you're human. And so they can smell you. And so, when we go into the woods, we go in full camouflage. We use cover scents and a dirt scent and something to kill your body odor. Sometimes we use a skunk scent around us, something to kill that human odor. And when you do that, you can go in and sit down and watch or try to sneak in. And, you might get lucky enough to sneak up on something, but they know you're here and they know exactly where you are by just hearing the noises in the woods. I've seen this with lots of animals that we've called in. One of the big things is that the blue jays over on the West Coast or the magpies here, or squirrels, gray squirrels over in the West Coast, as soon as they see a predator, they start to squawk or chirp or make all kinds of noise, and they will actually follow that predator. And so I've had them do that with me. As I've walked in the forest, they'll see me and start doing that. And that's a warning sign to all the animals out there. The predator's over here. So run.
Have you ever come across any structures?
I haven't. Or if I had, I wasn't sure, what it was. But I haven't seen any that just, stand right out at me. I've seen your Anthony, I think it was Maffett showed those teepee structures. And I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't seen one.
Yeah, one of the parts of your book, you talk about Sasquatch eating, was it pine nuts?
Yeah.
I took a report one time. I think a lot of people sometimes are interested in what Bigfoot eat. I took a report one time. A guy said he saw a Sasquatch. His description was right on, but he was a hunter, and he said it was eating the bark off a tree. And I was like, really? That seems kind of odd to eat the bark off a tree. And it was sitting there eating bark. And I remember I was talking to Bob Garrett, and I forget, there's some bark that you can actually put in a stew, where you can boil it and then drink the stuff that comes off of it, and it's actually medicinal.
Yeah.
It's good for pain. It's good for, and I don't want to misquote Bob, but I forget what he said exactly it was, but, and I just thought that was interesting. I've never heard of an encounter where they eat bark, but I think anything out there in the wild, I think they're going to eat. I'm with you. I really think it's a predator.
Yeah. And I had a really strange experience here a few years ago. We were out elk hunting, and we went to an area where we could see a big open mountain range with some junipers and a steep mountain. I could hear a knocking noise, so I pulled my bionic ear out, and I didn't have a digital recorder at the time. I wish I had. But I heard a sharp knock, and then a few seconds later, 3 or 4 muffled, kind of thing, And I thought, what is that? So we listened to it, and then every once in a while we hear a bark, sound just like a dog. So I thought, oh, there's got to be somebody camped up there and chopping wood or something. So we kept listening to it, and I had a brother that was way up on the mountain in his 4-wheeler, and he came back down and stopped talking to us. And I said, so is anybody on the mountain? And he said, no, there's 2 guys way over on the other side. I said, is there somebody camped right up here? Because he knows that area really well. He said, there's nobody camped over there. So I said, well, listen to this. So he listened to it, and then we had a whole pack of coyotes start barking and stuff, and then they quit. And then we kept hearing the sharp knock, and then 3 or 4 muffled marks, and nothing for a minute. So I asked him, what do you think's going on up there? And then it dawned on me. I said, wait a minute, are the pine nuts ripe right now? So we walked around, found a tree, and sure enough, the pine nuts were ripe. So this is just my theory. I think we had a Bigfoot up there that was knocking the cones out of the tree, smashing the cones up, and eating the pine nuts, and that's what he was doing. And I think he was barking once in a while, hoping to get a coyote or something to come over and grab him. I mean, that's just, you're out there in the woods and you hear these weird things, and you have to sit and think, what could possibly be making that noise? It's not a bear or a deer or elk. And if it's not a human, what is it?
Right. Was this all during the time when you had your camper rocked?
No, that was another whole episode in a different area of Utah. But yeah, that made my brother sit up and realize that, what, something to what his crazy brother's talking about is real. Because we had gone out, he had kept telling us, come over and let's call in these coyotes because there's a ton of coyotes over here. And so we went. He bribed us with a Dutch oven dinner. So we went over. We kind of called from there, just to see if we could hear any coyotes in the area. And then went up, half a mile from where he was camped. And he'd been up there cutting firewood. So we were driving up this road, and 7 or 8 deer came flying out of the junipers right towards us. We even had to stop and then turned off and ran a different way. My buddy and I thought, that's really strange. Normally the deer would run away from you, not right at you. And so we went a little farther, got out, went and hid in some trees and called for 15 minutes or so. And didn't hear any coyotes, didn't get any kind of reaction at all. So it was starting to get dark, so we went back and to where his motorhome was. I always stood out there talking by this giant wood pile he had, and turned to go in to eat, and I tripped over a piece of firewood and fell down and hit my head and tore a little skin off, and some blood got on this piece of firewood. I got up embarrassed and brushed myself off, and we went in and ate. And after that, we went out, and it was dark. He wanted us to call to see if there were any coyotes, because he kept saying there's tons of coyotes over here. We never saw one. So we called for a little bit and then left, and I left him with a call. I said, well, here's a call. You call them in if they're here. And so he called me the next morning. He said, last night after you guys left, it was probably half an hour later, we had a bunch of coyotes come in. They were running all right around the motorhome. Normally they don't do that. He said then, all of a sudden, they were gone. And I heard something out by my truck. And then I heard some pieces of firewood being thrown all over. He said, and the next thing he knew, something hit his motorhome. He had an old motorhome. It was a big old Dodge 20-some foot motorhome. He said it shook the whole motorhome, and even the step on where the door was, by where it slammed into it, rattled. And he flew out of bed with his gun, and he was thinking, if this thing's coming in after me, I'm just going to shoot through the door. and then he decided to turn his generator on, hoping to scare whatever it was off. And so, the thing is that with this call, we've had numerous times after we've left an area. For example, we were in Oregon calling. We left, walked probably 3/4 of a mile down to our friend's horse corrals and looked at the horses and then walked through back to his house. Well, the next day he went out to feed his horses, and one of his horses had claw marks on it. And so the thing is that these animals can pinpoint right where that noise is coming from. And whether they come in right now or come in later to investigate and to see if there's a dead animal there. So things happen, after we've done any call.
Is there a particular wounded animal that you call when you're out there?
It's a William Carlton call, and it's a bear call. It sounds like a dying rabbit, just like a coyote call would, but it's really loud and really raspy. And it can carry in the right spot. That sound could carry a mile. And so the thing is, you go in and you call for up to an hour because it may take that animal that long to get to you.
It's interesting. I had a guy on from Oklahoma, and he said it was it's a cross between a dying rabbit and a dying bear. And he was doing this call, and he said he was doing it for about 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. And he was sitting in the bush just waiting. I don't know if you heard this show or not, but this guy's a professional game hunter. And what he saw coming was, basically he's describing a dog man. First it walked up on all 4 legs, and then it stood up on 2 legs and was trying to find where that call was coming from. That's why I asked you that. That's interesting, because he said almost word for word, that's the same type of call he uses, and it brought this thing in.
It's probably Wayne's bear call. The last time we went out and called, I don't know how many months ago it was. October, I think it was. My buddy was standing there, because we always go with 2 people. Never go using that call with 1, because it works so well that, 1 person standing there is not really a threat to these animals. 2 people, they really think about attacking you. But we were calling, and he said that he saw something big and black. At first he thought it was a young cow walking down the road on all 4s. He said then it took off into the trees, probably 100 feet away from us, and walked around probably 100 and some feet away in the tree line, and growled he said it was kind of like a yell growl noise that he heard. I didn't hear it because I was blowing on that call. And then he didn't hear anything else. It really shook him up. because he said, I've never heard a bear do that. Bear usually come in and they'll pop their teeth and growl at you, but he said he'd never heard this noise before out in the woods.
I think it does. I think you got to be careful for people out there listening. Be careful before you start going out and doing calls like this. I'd say stay armed before you do a call.
Yeah, you really need to. Yeah, sorry.
Because I can tell, I already know people are going to go out and try it, and I hope they do try it. But be careful because it's like I always say, be careful what you wish for, because you might just call something in that you were trying to call, but then you have a moment of, oops, I probably shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, because you never know what's going to come in to those calls. I mean, you're calling and acting like you're a dying animal, and they come in because they think it's an easy kill. Take it away from somebody and eat it. And they mean business. And, if somebody's interested in doing this, you need to go in and buy a Wayne Carlton call, and it comes with a CD, and it shows you what it can do. And so you'll realize that. I mean, I take pepper spray, big can of Bear pepper spray that shoots big pieces of peppers out of it, and I take my 44. I don't use a rifle anymore because it's too close. So, yeah, and you never go by yourself to do that, ever.
No, you're absolutely right.
It's just not a smart thing to do.
Jack, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you sharing your stories. And again, the book is Bigfoot Evidence, I Cannot Deny It, by Jack McCarty. Jack, it's a great book. You have a lot of great pictures in there. You have a lot of great evidence that you collected, and it's available on Amazon. So if you get a chance, it's a good read.
Yep. Appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good day.
That wraps it up for tonight. Again, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, email me, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. I will see you next time.